When Chris Eubanks Sr. tells someone to be quiet, people listen. But this was more than just a heated argument. It was about boxing's future, fighter safety, integrity, and whether the sport is moving in the right direction. Now, the clash between Chris Eubanks Sr. and Simon Jordan was about more than personalities. Beneath the interruptions and beneath the disagreements was a serious discussion about boxing's direction. Issues such as weight management, fighter safety, integrity, and the role of debate in modern sports promotion all came into focus. Now, one of the most interesting questions raised was whether boxing is actually in a healthy state. On one hand, the sport is generating huge events, attracting global audiences, and producing major financial opportunities. But on the other hand, concerns remain about fighter safety, matchmaking, weight manipulation, and governance. Boxing often appears successful on the surface, but deeper structural issues continue to create debate among fans and industry figures alike. Now, Chris Eubanks Sr.'s focus is heavily on the issue of weights, but this is not a new concern. This is not a new concern because throughout history, fighters have searched for competitive advantages during weight cutting. So the problem is that drastic reductions can affect hydration, durability, and long-term health. Eubanks' position is simple. If weight making becomes excessive, the sport moves further away from genuine competition and closer to unnecessary risk. And the weight discussion, it ultimately comes back to fighter welfare. Boxing is already a dangerous sport. It's already dangerous. Every punch carries potential consequences. If an athlete enters the ring weakened by an extreme weight cut, questions naturally emerge about fairness and safety. Eubanks' argument appears rooted in the belief that victory should be earned through skill, preparation, and courage, not through exploitative loopholes within the system. And of course, this leads directly to the concept of integrity. Integrity is a word people use frequently, but what does it actually mean? In boxing, integrity means maintaining standards, even when breaking them may provide an advantage. It means respecting the rules, protecting competitors, and preserving the credibility of the contest. Without integrity, what happens? Trust disappears. And without trust, the value of victory begins to diminish. Eubanks Sr. has always positioned himself as a guardian of boxing values. Whether people agree with him or not, his concerns generally revolve around preserving the sport's credibility. He often speaks from a long-term perspective. The immediate financial reward may be attractive, but if standards continue to decline, the long-term reputation of boxing can suffer. That is the broader concern underlying many of his arguments. Now, Simon Jordan plays a completely different role. He plays a different role in these conversations. He is argumentative, confrontational, and rarely allows a point to pass unchallenged. Some viewers find this frustrating. Others find it essential. Think of this: in the attention economy, passive argument or passive agreement creates little engagement. Strong personalities generate discussion, disagreement, and interest. Jordan understands. He understands that conflict often drives audiences, and audiences are ultimately what modern media competes for. That is why exchanges like this, they become compelling and entertaining. Eubank provides principle, and within that principle, he provides conviction. Jordan provides challenge, and within that challenge, there's a resistance. The friction between these two, or the friction between these approaches, they create a tension. More importantly, it forces ideas to be tested publicly. Boxing needs advocates who defend standards, but it also needs people willing to question assumptions. The healthiest debates often emerge when neither side is prepared to back down easily. So let's put our cards on the table. let's put our cards on the table and go through this. So the first statement is, boxing appears successful, but serious concerns about safety, governance, and standards remain. I think there's two important phases in that statement: safety and governance. So let's quickly define them. So governance is a system of rules and decision making, and safety is the measures and protocols to protect boxers. So I think it's important that the system of rules are effective, because when the system of rules are effective, then that enables a culture of safety. Also, decision making is important, but the decision making has to have focus on boxer welfare, because you can have different types of decisions that are capitalist driven, decisions that are welfare driven, and decisions that incorporate both elements. So it's important that the decision making takes into effect the boxer's safety, and taking into effect the boxer's safety, it needs to be an educated assessment, not just an uneducated assumption. And when we look at safety, measures and protocols to protect boxers, I think there needs to be a collaboration here. Safety, the measures to protect boxers, we're looking at proper medical provision. But I also think that it's good to take advice from boxers who have been in boxing for considerable periods of time, because they have intimate knowledge of the sport and they have a real experience of the ups, but also the downs, the risks and the dangers and the culture of boxing. So again, you need a collaboration, the appropriate medical professionals. But we need to define that. Appropriate medical professionals within the boxing context, and also taking on the experience from ex-boxers and trainers that have that intimate knowledge. Now, the next point is that Chris Eubanks Sr. believes excessive weight cutting creates unnecessary dangers in sport. He is very qualified to speak on that position. Therefore, when he speaks on that position, we should listen, and we should give that perspective the respect it deserves. If we accept the premise that excessive weight cutting is dangerous, then we need not just medical provision, we need effective medical provision. So I think it's important to give the appropriate respect. Then we have the third statement, that fighter welfare should always take priority over gaining advantages through weight manipulation. Again, fighter welfare protects not only the fighter, but it protects boxing. That's essential, because when you allow a culture that is negative, or a culture that takes risks against a boxer's welfare, you're always potentially damaging the sport. You're damaging the credibility of the sport. You're damaging the infrastructure of the sport. It's a very dangerous thing to do. So the long-term thinking is to always prioritize fighter welfare, while at the same time taking into consideration the other elements that create entertainment, because this is entertainment, but there needs to be safety protocols. So the next statement is, integrity means protecting fairness, standards, and the credibility of competition. So there's a few phases there. We have integrity, and then we have fairness, standards, and credibility and competition. I'm just going to go into fairness and credibility. So fairness, generally, let's talk about fairness within the boxing context. That would mean competing under the same rules. So fairness in the boxing context is competing under the same rules. Clearly, we have seen situations where that does not happen. However, the majority of those situations, you could argue that does happen. So for example, you have weight classes, middleweights fight middleweights, lightweight fight lightweights, heavyweights fight heavyweights, etc. And then you have matchmaking. But there are other instances where fairness hasn't been implemented, perhaps with weight cuts and hydration clauses. But there's a caveat there, because if you consent to an unfair contract, if you and your team consent to an unfair contract, then who is responsible? The boxing infrastructure, the boxer, the team, or all three? So that's a very difficult one. Then we come to credibility, which is honesty, consistency, and competence. I'm not sure people look at boxing in that way. For example, do you look at managers having honesty, consistency, and competence? You could make an argument that some managers do, some promoters do, but I don't know that's the public perception. I think when it comes to consistency and competence, a lot of boxers hold that standard. So you look at Floyd Mayweather as a master of boxing. You think of consistency and competence. He embodies that with regards to his training. Bernard Hopkins reflects that, Evander Holyfield. But I'm not sure if people look at boxing like that when you look at the boxing infrastructure or the politics of boxing. Let's go to the next statement. Eubank Sr. sees himself as a defender of boxing's long-term values and reputation. I wouldn't criticize that statement. I think that premise is probably true. But the question is, what are boxing's long-term values and what is boxing's reputation? To me, I love boxing. It's great entertainment, and at the highest level, it represents a high form of mastery. From a boxer's perspective, I see credibility, I see consistency, I see discipline. But as a political structure or an infrastructure or as a system, does it have long-term values? Does it have a good reputation? Again, it depends how you look at it. Boxing is part of capitalism, and some people have become multi-millionaires because of boxing. So in that sense, you could say boxing has a good reputation. But do all promoters have good values? What are good values? That's a hard one to state, because on one hand, the public perception is what people think it is, and it doesn't mean that's what it is. So maybe the majority of promoters do hold good long-term values. Maybe the culture of boxing is more good than bad. But I think it's good for people to defend or to try and implement values and implement a positive reputation. So whether boxing has a good or bad reputation is just so subjective. But it's important that people push for boxing to have a good reputation and to raise its standards, even if those standards are good. And then we have Simon Jordan's confrontational style generates attention and drives meaningful debate. I agree with that. It's important. This is entertaining, or this is entertainment. Boxing is entertainment. Simon Jordan's pugnacious and loquacious style is entertainment. Entertainment is marketing. Marketing is an essential part of the attention economy. Therefore, characters like Simon Jordan are important for boxing's infrastructure. I guess the byproduct of that, is that the right word? The byproduct of that is that he takes that villain role and therefore he'll be hated. But perhaps people love to hate him. And finally, the clash worked between Eubank and Jordan because Eubank brought principles while Jordan brought challenges. And effectively, that's what Simon Jordan brings to the table. He challenges your perspective. He plays devil's advocate. Some people may see it as Machiavellian. Others see it as just entertainment. Others may see it as maybe deeper philosophical insight or just being pugnacious for the sake of it. But again, those contrasting styles, those contrasting perspectives, it was educating and it was entertaining. So that's the end of the video. Now I'm trying to build a digital boxing community. That means I'm interested in your comments, I'm interested in your questions, and I'm interested in your observations. Now, if you want to support the channel, simply like and subscribe and click the hype button. And if you want to watch more content like this, then simply click here or click here. As always, thanks for your time. It is much appreciated.